Welcome back. Hope you had a good break. Let's see. The midterm is the day after tomorrow. You knew that. Same rooms as last time, so some of you were in here and some of you were in 10 Evans. Did you want to have a few more people in here because of the, or you just wanted to sit? I think in 10 Evans, they want you to not sit in the middle because it was too hard to step over people if people in the middle had questions. So populate the edges before you populate the middle. Or if you sit in the middle, know that there's no way they can get to you to answer a question. So if you know that you never ask questions during a test, sit in the middle. And if you know you're somebody who sometimes asks questions during a test, sit on the edge. If you're in Rachel and Eric's room? No, Rachel and Andrew. Rachel and Andrew's room. There's a question over where? Same rooms as last time. We're good? All right. Any questions before I get started? Shh, Leah. Today. Yep. Yes, so this lecture and the Fishback article are fair game for Thursday. Yep. Yep. Other questions? Yep. Shh. Is it cumulative? You don't have to go back and reread the articles that were for midterm 1, and I don't know if the material itself is cumulative. There was a little bit that we did before the first midterm that you have to know to understand the stuff. Like, didn't we do part of slavery before the first midterm? I haven't written it yet, so that's why I'm struggling here. Didn't we do part of slavery before the first midterm and then postbellum emancipation after the midterm? So that's the kind of thing. So if there's some overlap in terms of the material, you don't want to be totally clueless on the pre-midterm 1 material. Does that make sense? Hello, she's back on her iPhone. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. It's one of those looking at your crotch things. You know it's not the crotch, it's actually the phone. Yes? Yes, so we are going to talk about Fishback article today. Yep. Anything else? Okay, cool. All right. Ooh, my animation stopped. Probably I broke the computer. There we go. There we go. Okay. Yes. Shh. No. No. So mergers and acquisitions I didn't cover, so no. Are there other topics like that? Are there other topics that I didn't cover that were covered in the readings? I don't think so. Was that in the readings? Oh, sorry, my bad. No. Sam. German antitrust is a no. Typhoid, no. Typhoid was an old reader article. So that's one of the problems with the old midterm questions, right, is that the reader changes. The readers really changes more in this last third that we're coming up to. Sam. Railroads, yes. Antitrust, mergers, acquisitions, no. Typhoid, no. Okay, here we go. Why recovery was so fast. So to try to get us back up to speed, because it's been 10 days, 12 days, when we left, we were looking at explanations for why the recovery was so slow. So the economy hit a peak in 29, it hit a trough in 33, and it took the economy until 42 to get back to baseline, to get unemployment back to where it was in 29, to get back to the trend in terms of GDP. And so the fact that it took almost a decade to get back to trend led lots of people for many, many years to say, wow, that was a really slow recovery. It took us a whole decade to get back to where we had been in 1929. The contrasting story comes from Professor Romer of our department, who argues instead of it being a slow recovery, that it was a very rapid recovery. And the evidence in support of thinking of this as a rapid recovery comes from looking at the growth rates of real GDP. So here in table 5, this is a table from last time's handout. It's not on today's handout. It's from the one that you had last week. The second column is the rate of change of real GNP. You can see the negative signs here for the drops, where we had a 10, 8, 15% declines, annual declines in real output. And then the fast recovery comes from particularly these first 3 years here of 9% growth in 34, 10% growth in 35, and 14% growth in 1936. That's astoundingly rapid growth. We would be back to baseline, I think, if we had had growth that rapid coming out of 2009. We've had pretty tepid growth coming out of 2009. We've had 2.5%, 3% growth, and that's why we're looking at a full decade of recovery from the 2007-2009 downturn. This was a full decade to recover, but yet with incredibly rapid growth, with 9, 10, 15% rates of growth. So for Romer, the question is not why did it take so long, but what did they do to get such incredibly rapid growth going as the economy turned the corner and came out of that downturn? The argument that she makes is that it was very rapid money supply growth that explains that very rapid growth of real GDP. So one picture, which is on the handout from last time, it's also in the article in your reader by Professor Romer, is this one, which is just a graphical representation of the information in the last column of the table, showing you the rate of change of the money supply. So money supply, coins, currency, balances, and checking accounts. This is M2. Put your glasses on so you can see. Coins, currency, balances, and checking and savings accounts are included in M2. And the final column of the table shows you the rate of change of the money supply. The chart is showing you the difference from the norm, so how much faster or slower was money growth rate relative to the norm. And you can see 31, 32, 33, so here's 1933. And that we've got relatively rapid growth here in 34, 35, 36, very low, relatively low growth of the money supply here in 35, 6, 7, 8, and then rapid growth again later on. You can see it also in the tables over here. So the rapid money supply growth, 34, 35, 36, 37, and again here in 39. And the argument is that it was very rapid growth of the money supply, which is to say very expansionary monetary policy that made the recovery so robust or so fast, that made the growth rate so very high. So the slow recovery is it took a decade. Why did it take so dang long? The fast recovery is, yeah, but it was growing at nearly 10% per year. How could we possibly grow that fast? Okay. To look at whether it was fiscal or, I'm sorry, Sam. The deviations from the norm was taking what's the norm, the rate of money supply growth in the previous period. I'd have to look at the article. I think it's 1919 to 1929. So she defines the previous decade. Did you guys look at it real carefully? No? Huh? I know, but is the norm 1919 to 1929? From that, sorry, 1919. Yeah, so it's the 1919 to 1929 growth rate is defined as the norm, and then this is just, is this above or below? Why are the 20s defined as the norm? There's an interesting question. I don't know. I would guess that part of it is the Fed is established with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, so we can't really go back before 1914. And immediately after that comes World War I, which is going to really kind of screw things up, so we don't want to pay any attention to the war years. So 1919 really starts the post-World War I period, and there's nothing else during the Fed era after the war before the Depression. You could compare it with 1950s, but you couldn't compare it with 1950s in the you couldn't say, oh, they had rapid rates of growth of the money supply in the 1930s relative to what they would do 20 years later. So it's comparing what they were doing in the 30s with what they had done in the previous decade. So the best I can do. Patrick. Yeah. 1923 and 1927. Okay. Thank you, Patrick, for reading my table better than I did. So that the norm is, thank you very much. The footnote says that the norm is actually not 1919 to 1930, but 1923 to 1927. lagged 1 year. So I'm happy with the 20s, okay? So I'm happy with the norm is the 20s. 23 to 26 lagged 1 year is what the article says, which is fine. No, he said it's the, Patrick, what does it say? It says it's the growth rate of M1? M1. M1 versus M2 is savings accounts. So it's basically, there's not a lot of difference at that time between M1 and M2 in terms of the patterns. So I think looking at the rate of change of M1 versus the rate of change of M2 isn't going to change the story. Okay, so how do we get that story about whether it's fiscal or monetary policy that contributes to this really rapid growth? The story about whether it's fiscal or monetary policy that contributes to the really rapid growth comes from an experiment, one of these counterfactual experiments. And the counterfactual experiment here is if policy, first on the one hand fiscal policy and on the other hand monetary policy. Do you guys have a question? Thank you. First fiscal, and then in a minute we'll look at monetary policy. If fiscal policy had behaved the same in the 1930s as it behaved in the 1920s, what would the pattern of real GDP have been in the 1930s? And then we're going to do the same thing for monetary policy. So if the policy folks had made no fundamental changes to how they conducted policy in the 1930s relative to the 1920s, then that hypothetical, the counterfactual of what would the economy have looked like in the 30s if the policymakers in the 30s had behaved the way they did in the 1920s, if they were behaving the same way in the 30s as they were behaving in the 1920s, there would be no difference between how the economy behaved in the 30s with the actual policy and how the economy would have behaved in the 30s if they had behaved in the 30s the way they did in the 20s. Got that? So if they stepped left when they stepped left, then they would have stepped left when they stepped left. Basically, I don't know. It's an analogy. It didn't work. But so if they behaved in the 30s the way they had in the 20s, then the hypothetical that showed how the economy would have resulted if they had behaved in the 30s the way they did in the 20s would be exactly what the economy was because they did behave in the 30s the way they had in the 20s. However, can I do the however first? Okay, good. However, if the policy authorities had behaved very differently in the 1930s than they did in the 1920s, then when we compared the way the economy actually was as a result of the actual policy in the 1930s with the counterfactual of how the economy would have been in the 1930s if the policymakers had behaved in the 30s the way they did in the 20s, then we would have a difference. So if, for instance, if policy was much more expansionary in the 1930s than it had been in the 1920s, so that means they behaved differently, then the result would have been that the economy would have grown faster in the 1930s than it would have grown had the policymakers behaved in the 30s the way they did in the 20s. Now, Peter.
I just don't understand why would the economy and recession respond differently than economy growth, though, to fiscal stimuli and monetary stimuli. It's kind of what I didn't understand why we use such a relationship.
Why would you, give me the question again, which relationship? I lost it.
Like a coefficient, like, okay,
Yeah.
1920s, you got a fiscal coefficient, you got a monetary coefficient.
Right.
Doesn't the economy respond differently during growth?
Okay, so the mathematics of doing what I just said, coming up with this counterfactual, comes from running little regressions with the 1920s and seeing how output behaves relative to policy, or how policy behaves relative to output, and then how output behaves, both of those things, right? And so Peter's question is, but the 1920s was an expansionary time. I think this is your question. The first part of the 30s is a downturn, and then the second part of the 30s is an upswing. Should we expect the economy to behave the same in the downturn, to respond the same to policy in the downturn as it does in the expansionary times, right? It's a good point. It's a point that generally macroeconomists have not in the past conceded. But in this case, it doesn't really matter because what we're really going to be focusing on is here the 1933 on behavior of the economy, and so we really are comparing expansion to expansion. Yeah. If we'd asked a different question, if we'd asked a question about the downturn and how deep the downturn was, then you're concerned about whether the economy responds the same way in a downturn as it does in an expansion would be a good concern. But right now we're going to do expansion to expansion. Yeah. Not exactly. There are two different stories about the recovery. One story about the recovery is it was really slow. Why did it take a full decade? And in that story about why it took a full decade, there's, well, fiscal policy, was it that fiscal policy failed or was it that fiscal policy was never tried? And so that's the stuff that we did last week. Before break, right? And then there's the Romer, which is, yeah, it took a decade, but boy, the economy was growing like gangbusters. So it was a really rapid recovery in terms of the rates of growth. Why was it so rapid? And again, we're going to look at, is it fiscal or is it monetary policy? So it's looking at, it's assuming that the explanation for the rapid growth comes from policy, monetary or fiscal policy, and it's basically a race between those two. The rapid money supply growth is expansionary monetary policy, which, here, let me show the second picture, which explains why there's such a difference. Let me do these two pictures and then, because I want to get this whole thing out and I'll take questions. Okay, so if policy in the 30s had been like policy in the 20s, then the way the economy actually behaved in the 30s shouldn't be all that different from the way the economy counterfactual would have behaved in the 30s if they had used the policy from the 20s. In the left-hand picture, there's actually two lines there. You can see it on the far right. You can see the dashed line and the solid line. Well, assuming your eyesight's 20/20. Maybe. If you can't see that there's two lines on where my arrow's pointing, go get your glasses checked. So there's a dashed line and there's a solid line. And you can maybe pick out down here on the far left that there's a dashed line just below the solid line. But those two lines are so much on top of each other that about 15 people in the room are making appointments with their optometrist while I speak. Okay? Because you can't really see the difference. What that means is that the normal, this is back to Sam's question, what's normal? Let me put quotes around normal. Normal fiscal policy is 1920s fiscal policy. So I'll put quotes around it. Do you like that better? Okay. All right. We're going to put quotes around normal. All right. So on the left, the fact that the actual pattern of the economy, which is the solid line, and the counterfactual pattern of the economy, which is the dashed line, are exactly the same, means that there was no fundamental difference in the way the fiscal policy authorities were conducting policy in the 1930s versus how they conducted policy in the 20s. So the fiscal authorities, that's Congress was doing the same thing in the 1930s they'd done in the 1920s. There was no fundamental, there wasn't hugely expansionary or contractionary policy. They were just sort of trucking along with the same basic implicit model of how to behave. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, the actual amount of real GDP is the solid line, top one, and the counterfactual, what GNP would have been if they had used, quote, normal, which is to say 1920s, monetary policy is the dashed line. That says if the monetary policymakers, the Fed, if the monetary policymakers had behaved in the 30s the way they did in the 1920s, the economy would have grown much more slowly. If they had behaved in the 30s the way they did in the 20s, the economy would have grown along that dashed line in the right-hand picture. But in matter of fact, the economy grew along that solid line in the right-hand picture. We see a difference between the solid and the dashed line for monetary policy. We don't see a difference for fiscal policy. That's the evidence that tells us that the reason the economy grew so very rapidly, 10% or more growth, 34, 35, and 36, is the result of the relatively rapid growth of the money supply. That it was the Federal Reserve allowing the money supply to grow so very quickly, 34, 35, 36, and then again 39 and on, that allowed very rapid growth rates. Baruch. Okay, so what role does the idle capacity? We had a chart previously that looked at capacity utilization, and the number that I always have in my head is in 1932 capacity utilization was 42%. So we've got nearly 60% of the nation's factories are idle coming out of the Depression. And so the question is, what role does that play? In this horse race between fiscal and monetary policy, it plays no role whatsoever. So it presumably, the idle capacity would have the same influence on, well, let me not say it that way. The implicit assumption is, that's better, that the idle capacity would have the same effect on the results of fiscal policy as it would have on the results of the monetary policy. So it may be that the idle capacity has something to do with the really rapid rates of growth, that you don't have to build new factories in order to produce faster and produce more. But the comparison between the monetary and the fiscal policy shouldn't be affected by the existence of that idle capacity. Okay. Other questions? Okay. All right. So how do we go from monetary policy to really rapid rates of growth? The argument is we go from monetary policy to really rapid rates of growth through very, very low real interest rates. Now, what we know today, coming out of 2009, is we've had, I didn't put the numbers up here, I think I have a lecture later on where we get to look at it. We've had incredibly rapid rates of growth of money since 2009. The Federal Reserve has allowed M1 and M2 to grow at phenomenally fast rates, as fast if not faster, what sort of these numbers? Yeah, at least as fast as what we had in the 1930s. But yet we haven't seen the really rapid rates of growth of output. So clearly there's something more to the story that isn't in the article, that wasn't in the thought that went into the article, because if it had simply been really, really rapid rates of monetary growth, and that's all you need, we would have 5% unemployment today. Yeah, I know. All of my seniors just groaned, right? Sorry. So the story for the 1930s is it's the really rapid rate of money growth, and the explanation for how that change in money translates through to a change in the money, change in money translates through to a change in GNP comes from looking at real interest rates. Remember that real interest rates is the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. So that if the nominal interest rate is smaller than the inflation rate, we're going to have negative real interest rates. And the argument is that people who are doing investing, which is to say not stocks and bonds, but building buildings and buying machinery, the people who are doing the investing in physical capital care about both the nominal interest rate and inflation rates, because they are trying to figure out whether something is a profitable machine to purchase, and they decide profitability by thinking about that same equation that we've used several times now. They look at the stream of future earnings from the machine, compare that with the price of the machine, with the interest rate calculated in to figure out whether it's a profitable purchase or not. And that stream of future earnings, if you're going to what do I want to say? That stream of future earnings depends upon what's happening to prices over time. So inflation goes into that calculation as to whether or not a purchase of a machine is profitable. You can capture all of that information in that jumbled up sentence simply by looking at the real interest rate. What we care about is not whether the real interest rate is above or below zero. What we care about is whether the real interest rate is going down, whether the real interest rate is lower in one year than it was in the previous year. So here we come along, and we've got this tremendously large drop in the real interest rate here, right around early 1933. Real interest rates rise, but stay lower than they had been in 29. So that's the argument, that it runs through investment spending, which runs through real interest rates. Okay. We played with some of this stuff. One of the reasons I had you play with this on the problem set was to come back to it. So on your problem set, you played with some of this data. You played with the data for the output of producer and consumer goods. I didn't put this chart in your handout because it was in the solutions to problem sets. You already have it there. So this is the chart that was in the problem set 2 solutions. It's the same, similar, I hope, to the chart that you created, and looked at the output of consumer and producer goods. It's 1919 to 1938, and we've got 3 lines here. We've got the red line is the producer goods, the blue line is consumer goods, and the green line was the consumer goods without automobiles. So which one fluctuates the most? Producer goods. All right, producer goods, that's the machinery, the equipment used to produce other things. That's the capital goods, the physical capital goods that we're talking about when we talk about investment spending. So producer goods are those goods that are being purchased when we talk about the I of C plus I plus G plus net exports. And the producer goods fluctuate much more. So remember this started in 1919, it went through 1939, and we got this huge decrease in the amount of producer goods output, and then it now, part of the jiggity-jiggity-jiggity-joo in this thing has to do with the fact that this is monthly data. And so there's always less production in the winter, because it's winter, than there is in the spring and the fall, because it's spring and fall. And so you're going to get some jiggity-jiggity-jiggity-jiggities in the data when you have monthly data. We have not what they call seasonally adjusted this data. We haven't taken out the effect of the fact that people go on vacation in the summer, and in the winter it's cold, and factories sometimes in the east shut down because of the cold winters. And so that's some of the jiggles in the data. So I always figure if you squint, we're back to the optometrist here, if you squint, or if you couldn't see the 2 lines on the first graph, you're probably okay right now, so that you ignore some of the month-to-month jiggles and just kind of look at what's happening overall. You still can see that we've got the producer goods are going down, they're going up, they're coming back down. There's a lot of volatility in the production of the producer goods. One of the reasons I wanted you to calculate these growth rates was I wanted you to see that the growth rates of output vary a whole lot from year to year. And so in the problem set, when you calculated the annual rates of change, you got, for instance, if I just look at producer goods, that in 1933 to 34, and remember we were going March to March, because I wanted you to take March because that's the official NBER date of when we hit the trough, when the economy turned. So March to March 33 to 34, 60% growth in producer goods output. That's huge. Oh my gosh, that's just tremendously huge. Now remember the thing about percentage changes is that when you're starting from a really low base, a little bit of growth from a low base is going to give you a big percentage change. And the same amount of growth from a higher base is going to give you a small change. Right? So, but we had 60% growth in producer goods output 1933 to 1934. I am willing to bet some money, not a whole lot, maybe $5, that you can't find any other 12-month period